Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I think many of you will remember the snowstorm that you braved to hear Dante Marioni speak last February. Tonight, it's a thunderstorm that heralds the Meet the Artist lecture, which will be presented by a team of two artists, Jiri Harcuba from the Czech Republic and April Surgent from Seattle. Yay! Jiri and April have taught and lectured together several times, and it is truly a special treat to hear the voices of two very different generations and backgrounds speak with passion about cutting and engraving glass. Jiri is the current subject of the museum's Masters of Studio Glass exhibition, which focuses on the work and careers of influential artists. You can see his portraits and learn about his ideas on the West Bridge. His exhibition is next to the exhibition of another influential artist, Louis Comfort Tiffany. An artist and educator who is widely respected, Jiri's specialty is portraiture in engraved glass. Whether the subjects of his portraits are friends, renowned artists, or historical personalities, he treats them all in a similar fashion, using spare sculptural cuts and subtle optical effects to create their individual profiles. Jiri works in an abstract style that is inspired by the pureness and simplicity of prehistoric art. By engraving, Jiri says, we leave traces of ourselves. I show the relationship between prehistoric carving and contemporary art, linking the past and the future. Jiri sees himself as an innovator and as a guardian of tradition, which is a perfect description of his approach to his art. Without Jiri's quiet but powerful influence, the art of engraving in contemporary studio glass would be close to extinction. He is that important. Jiri has exhibited internationally for over 50 years, and he has received numerous prestigious awards. In 1988, he was honored by the American Numismatic Society for Lifetime Achievement in the Art of Metals, and in 1995, he received our own museum's Reykjavik Commission. In 2006, Jiri was the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award by Urban Glass in New York, and in 2007, the Glass Art Society also awarded him for his lifetime achievement in glass. The other half of our duo tonight is April Surgent, a young artist who has quickly achieved international fame for her cut and engraved fused glass panels. April's images, often of urban scenes but also of landscapes, are derived from her photographs, which she says are a record of our time as I perceive it. The transformation of a photograph into a relief engraving on glass makes a passing moment permanent. April has brought a fresh, young perspective and energy to a technique with far-reaching roots that go back to ancient Roman cameo glass. A graduate of the glass program at the Australian National University in Canberra, April returned to her hometown of Seattle in 2004 to establish her studio. Her work is much sought after by collectors, and in 2010, Urban Glass recognized her achievements with its New Talent Award. April's first solo museum show opens later this year at the Bellevue Arts Museum in Seattle. Finally, our program this evening will include a few songs by an artist who is the Czech Republic's top female vocalist, and this is Lenka Dusilova. This is a wonderful honor for us, and I thank Lenka and her friend Martin Janetsky for her performance tonight. Lenka is an award-winning singer and songwriter whose records, that's right, more than one, have achieved gold status. It really is a special event to have such accomplished artists with us tonight, so please welcome Jiri, April, and Lenka.
Good evening, I'm Lenka Dusilova. Lenka leží v lůžku a stůně. Lenka leží v lůžku a sen se jí jízdách, ve snu ryby skáčou ven z tůně, lapají po můrách a po hvězdách, Lenka líny sbírá, jejich kostmi učeše zválený lán, plánu panu rybář tu svíral, ona byla hloubka a on údna prám, tudy tudy da toke, tudy tudy da toke. Tuby šumí na dlouhých hrázích, černý kořen do srdce dloubavě pích, len se rybář po ránu schází, to nehonem záplavě kmentových cích, Lenka ráno vstává, ranní světlo křižuje větraný dům, je to sama a to se stává, srdcečku bez plávkem a rudá je tůň, má tajemství, to si chrání, ač ráno jej skrývá míň. Tlekníný prosvítá, skrání a v očích se míhá lín, má tajemství, to si chrání, ač ráno jej skrývá míň. Tlekníný prosvítá, skrání a v očích se míhá lín. One song for now. It's Busy Eyes. It's about my childhood. Guitarra ding dong ding den, guitarra ding dong man, guitarra ding dong vivo do pevo, guitarra ding dong ding den, guitarra oh maybe vivo do me do dia no budu de mo, sen mu vázaná sněhem bílým fáčem. Prohýbá se podlaha krajiny a perličkovým stehem mezi pláčem zdobývá mě slunce nevinný. Unesou někdy vás Oči mám jako pečky zmrzliny. Děvčátko s platným pasem, Bůh ví na čem. Nezbývá než ti říct jediný. Unesu někdy vás, unesu do dětství. Štvírečkou, tenkou jak vlas, noké, točí oči, zase žnou, jde, za nás už nikdo kouzla nedělá. Za nás už nikdo kouzla nedělá. Za nás už nikdo kouzla nedělá. Ole, totiž není o čem. Unesu někdy vás nokem, unesu do dětství. Štýrečkou, tenkou jak vlas, no dáme, vlčí oči zase žnou, unesu mě i vás, možná právě včas, dej zázraky jsou tebe. Možná jsou někde v nás schovaný pro úžas. No.
I wish I could always follow a music act to kind of relax me a little bit. First of all, I want to say it's really an honor to be here and a really big pleasure too. I've never been to Corning before, and I yesterday and today have had a chance to look through the museum a little bit and look at the library, and it's just been really an amazing experience. And of course, it's an honor to be here with Jiri. Again, we're doing a collaboration. When I was thinking about how to put this lecture together, Corning asked me to speak about my work and a little bit about Jiri and I's relationship and how it is I ended up to be here tonight speaking with you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it is that I ended up here and a little bit about my work and how Jiri has been so important to my art making practice. My story starts in Seattle. I was born in Missoula, Montana, but I grew up in Seattle. And for those of you who know, Seattle is a huge glass-making center. There's a lot of glass there. I saw some people blowing glass when I was 14 years old, and I can't get this to move. Is there another way to move the image forward? Sorry, oh, got it. I'll hold it out here. Oh, the other one. That's all right. When I was 14, I saw some people blowing glass, and I was immediately infatuated, and I begged my parents if I could have some glass blowing classes, and they were fortunate enough to support me with that. So subsequently, during high school, I studied glass blowing, and then at time for graduation, I decided that instead of continuing to be a glass blower in Seattle, I wanted to study art. I also love to travel, so I decided to go to the Canberra School of Art in Australia. That was really the first kind of awakening that I had in glass. I had been blowing glass for a few years up to that point, but I didn't know anything else about any other way of working with glass. While I was at the ANU, I was still interested in blowing glass, but I had all this introduction to other ways of working. And this is actually my first cameo engraved piece. It's a layer of white with some green and red underneath it. But this was my very first experimentation, and I had cut through the layer of glass, and I kind of found this world under there that I was really excited about. So there came this point where I almost stopped working with glass, and I was spending more time in the print shop, more time drawing, and more time painting than I was in making any sort of glass. It was at this time that it was my third year of studies. It was in 2003, and I'm giving you all this background so you kind of know where I'm going here, but in 2003 I ended up doing a competition, and the prize for the competition was a full tuition scholarship to Pilchuck Glass School. And I ended up winning that scholarship, and it just so happened that year Jiri was instructing a course, and my lecturer, Jane Bruce, had encouraged me to take his course, and I was accepted. From that point, I entered his class from a blowing perspective, as you saw that my very first engraving that I did, and I really had no idea what I was going to encounter when I entered his course, and Jiri was there. Pilchuck's only a 2.5-week course, and he was there and just said, do it, just go ahead and try, and you know, you can do whatever you want to. There's no limits to what you can do. And it was really his words of advice and encouragement that let me go back to Canberra at university and start to make some figurative engraving work. Sorry about this, folks. There we go. This is the first piece that I made after I took Jiri's course, and it was also the first figurative piece that I did, and this is kind of, this piece really captures everything that I had wanted to capture in glass at that point, and it was the very first time that I was able to clearly connect my ideas to the objects that I was making, and it really was a turning point for me. I didn't have great skills at cold working. You know, I'd just taken that very quick course, but I was experimenting. I was fusing glass and carving through the layers, and I was able to just record the subjects and the basic elements that I needed to record the simple stories that I was trying to tell. There weren't very many. There were very many great teachers in Canberra, but there was nobody who specifically taught glass engraving, so I was kind of put in this back room where the engraving lathe was, and I was off to do it myself, and I came across a lot of technical difficulties and questions that I had about engraving, and that's when I turned back to Jiri. I started to think, you know, how can I learn more about engraving, so I started writing him letters, and I would ask him everything about equipment, glass engraving schools in the Czech Republic, and anything engraving. I just wanted to find some information. And to my surprise, Jiri wrote me back, and he kept replying, but he never, or I guess maybe once or twice he mentioned engraving, but he really never, you know, focused on the engraving, and I soon stopped asking about engraving, but we would talk about things of life and death and art and travel, and I think it seemed like I got more letters than I did because it took me so long to read his handwriting. I don't know. I'd sit there and I'd have people try and help me decipher it, but I think I'm pretty good at it now. So over the last 7 years, Jiri and I have, he's become my mentor and my great friend, and I go to him for all sorts of questions of advice, and over the last 7 years, we've had many projects together, and we had a show together at Bullseye in Portland last year, and of course, as you can imagine, it's an incredible experience for me. Sorry. Okay. So I didn't know at the time, but winning that scholarship and taking that course with Jiri that summer really changed my life. And, I kind of walked down this road and I haven't looked back since. And though our work is very different, our correspondences and his words of encouragement have really been inspirational and influential to me. So now I'll start talking a little bit about my work. I view, as Tina said, I view my work as a visual record of our times, and I look at things from my daily surroundings, from my routines to my travels. As I said, I like to travel, and I'm always looking for the things that are really really basic and the things that make life what it is, nothing extraordinary, and just the simple things that we see every day. And I like to look for kind of those seemingly insignificant moments that just kind of make us stop and look and think about what's happening and how we live our lives, how we interact with each other, and what people are doing. I live in the city, and I feel like sometimes I'm running around with my blinders on and I can't really focus on what's actually happening around us. So I like to think of my work as a stopping moment where I kind of digest what's going on. And I use my camera as kind of as a sketchbook, I guess, and I use the photograph as my way of just quickly recording the moments around me, and I look at it as a way of drawing. I do draw a lot, and I like doing prints and things, but I also like the photographed image opposed to the drawings because of how quickly it can capture the subject. With the glass, I find it intriguing because of how quickly it enables me to record those moments, and those moments that I'm looking for in my work might be moments that would have otherwise been lost that you can really catch with a photo. And because I'm trying to capture moments that are the essence of our surroundings, that immediacy is really important for me. So the photograph is really essential for my work, and it works as a really good base for the composition for my work, but it doesn't always tell the full story. I like to look at my work as experiential, and the photograph is a great base for me, but when I'm doing the engraving, I do a lot of abstraction, and I'll take a photograph and I'll paint over it, or I'll draw over it, and as I'm engraving, it's a very slow process, so I'm able to really think about the moment that I'm recording and relay my feelings and interpretations of the story into the glass. So I view myself really as a storyteller, and I use my engravings to define my experiences and share them with others. With my work, I try to also accentuate that I capture things only as I perceive them to be. I understand that individuals, we all come together, and we all come together with our own perspectives and our own perceptions, and I think it's really important to understand that, and especially with my work, it's all just an image. So you're all coming here together listening to the lecture, but you'll all leave with a different understanding and perspective of what happened. And I like with my work that people can look at it and they're reading a story just through images, and they'll all relate their own histories to the image. So when people look at my work, I like how I really like how I get the different reactions, and it's just like a series of images. I think it's really neat how people can look at a series of images and get different stories, and how vivid imagery can be on us. And I have a series of photos that kind of tell a story without words, and how powerful imagery can be. Sorry about that. So the purpose for me is to make these engravings and have just a better understanding of my surroundings and daily life through our interaction with different people and places. And people often ask me, you know, why do I bother using glass versus the photographs that I take, or why do I bother using glass versus the prints or the drawings that I make? And there's a few different reasons for that. And aside from being passionate about engraving and a little mildly obsessed about it, I don't think that any other material really captures the moments that I'm trying to capture the way that I want them to, like glass does. And that transformation of the photograph into a relief engraving really, you know, I'm really able to spend the time and put my emotion into it. And I notice when I'm having a bad day, you can tell in the work, and when I'm having a happy day, you can tell in the engraving, or when I'm really thinking about what's happening, it's in the engraving. And I feel really close to each piece that I make just because I think of that time. And any engraver, any artist who spends a lot of time on a piece will feel a certain connection to that work. And of course, glass has a quality of light that you don't really get with any other material. For me, I did a series of experiments where I took some of my engravings and I printed off of them, and the prints were amazing. I loved the prints, but they didn't have that same quality of light that you get with glass. So I think over all of the reasons, I engrave on glass specifically for the quality of light that you can get versus any other material. I want to go over just briefly of my technique, just because a lot of people end up asking me, you know, how do you end up doing it? So I thought I would also include that. I start off with the photograph, as I said, but then I have to make panels. So I cut and fuse glass, and I typically layer three colors of glass. People always think my work's black and white, and there's actually a lot of color in there, but I guess I'm the only person who knows that, because I hide it a little bit, but it's there. So I start off, I work from photographs or drawings, and this is after the panels have been fused, and then I mark on the panels with a red wax pencil, and that just stays on the glass. And I mark out the composition accordingly to the photograph. And I always have a photograph or whatever I'm working off of kind of right by me as a reference. And then I start off with a cutting lathe, and this is my spatula that I use, and I use this machine. It has big wheels, and I remove a lot of material with this. I'm working with bullseye glass, which is a really hard glass, and if I were to go straight to the engraving lathe, it would take a really long time. So because of the material, I'm using this big lathe. And then here's the piece. I've removed some of the material you can see and remarked it, and I've established the light grounds, the foreground and the background with the piece. And then here I stand when I work on the glass. I bring the glass up to the wheel and move the glass around like you would drawing, but bringing the paper to the pencil. And after I've roughly cut the composition out, I go to my engraving lathe, and you can see the photograph in the background that I use as a reference. And here it's where I do all my detail work. And I spend most of my time sitting here in my studio, and sometimes I listen to music and things, but I really love working this way, and I love figuring things out. Every piece is kind of a mystery, and figuring out how I'm going to do it and where it's going to lead me. Because I have to lift the panels up to the engraving lathe, my work has typically been pretty small. These panels, this is a 4-panel piece, and the 2 panels there, in the middle are about the largest I can do without being too cumbersome. I'm lifting the panels up, and it can, even though they don't weigh that much for just a moment, they can be really heavy for a long period of time. But in 2007, Jiri and I had a residency at the Bullseye Glass Factory, and we were there just to kind of experiment with carving on their glass. And Jiri kind of made me, from this point, look at my work a little bit differently. He had the folks at Bullseye fuse this really big piece of glass, and he started working on it with this hand tool. And there's a few things that are really, really spectacular about this. He had never used a hand tool before, and he was open to trying that. And I thought, geez, here's somebody who's been engraving for, I don't know how many years? 50, yeah. Well, somebody who's been engraving glass for a very long time is open to experimenting so freely and so openly. And I thought it was really neat how open he was, and how it was no big deal to push his boundaries. And it got me thinking about how I could think myself. I have just a quote from him. To have Zen mind means always to be the beginner, always open to accept new ideas, to be amazed by new discoveries, to be a lifetime student. And Jiri has a lot of quotes like this, but he really teaches through his actions, which I think is a lot more powerful. The words are powerful too, but to lead by example is pretty neat. So his guidance, whether he knows it or not, over the last 2 years I have been thinking of pushing myself, and I'm currently in the middle of working on a huge project for the Bellevue Arts Museum. It's going to be my first installation project and also my first large-scale project. This piece is very much in the process. This is right as I was leaving out the door. I took this photo, and it's just rough cut into the glass, so you can't really tell what's happening. But there's 105 12-inch by 6-inch panels. It's 3.5 feet tall to 4 feet tall, and about 55 square feet. The biggest piece I've done is 3 by 3, so it's kind of a push for me. In my studio, we laid these aluminum shelving so I can put the panels onto the wall and step back. It's really important when you're engraving, your face is very close to the wheel, so I made this shelf so I can put the glass up and step back and see what I'm doing, like a traditional muralist painter would do. And I'm marking the composition out with a projector. Usually I work differently, but working on such a large scale and making sure proportions are right, I'm trying the projector out, and hopefully it works. I'm not sure yet, but it's a big project that I'll have some digital video with and some audio, and I'm really excited, and I don't think that I could have been inspired to do something like this without the help of a great teacher. This spring I had the opportunity to visit Jiri in the Czech Republic, and I not only got to see where he works, but I also got to see a lot of the regions of where the traditional glassmaking happens, and I'd never been there before, so it was really an eye-opening experience. I got to see so much glass and where all of this heritage is coming from. And I saw a lot of examples of really beautiful glass that I could have stared at for hours and hours and hours. Just amazing examples of engraved glass and glass in general. But I always turn back to Jiri's work for inspiration in engraved glass, for its expression and for its individuality. Going to the Czech Republic and seeing all these traditional examples of engraved glass really made me aware of how far he's pushing the boundaries of contemporary glass, and how he's really making glass his own. And it's really significant for me to look at his work as, I guess, as inspiration to push my own boundaries. And I end with a quote from him. Every genuine creation is poetry. We don't create what we see, rather what we know and what we think and feel. Thank you.
My first example is the famous Hedwig Beaker, the best maybe engraving ever done because of this combination of cameo and intaglio engraving and this abstraction of the lions that is absolutely contemporary. Now let's go back to the history of the Czech, it's difficult to say, Bohemian tradition of engraving. This is Caspar Lehmann. At the time when Caspar Lehmann was appointed to be engraver for Rudolf II, the emperor, at the same time my ancestors came to the small village being glass blowers, and so the history of the Czech glass is also the history of my family. This is another famous piece by Caspar Lehmann, and it's in the both pieces are in the museum in Prague. Other point, I'm showing Caspar Lehmann because we are still learning from him this cutting in glass. It's different from the 19th century engraving. He was really using, because he was a skilled rock crystal cutter, and he started, as the legends say, or the history says, he started to transpone it into glass. So this was maybe the first, after a long period of the medieval art, again glass in that Middle European region. So the detail shows even more how this using the wheel. Another picture of the same goblet. And this is a small village where I was born and Dominic Beeman was born. And it's a time when Dominic Beeman, in the first half of the 19th century, worked there in that small factory, and in that small village worked 17 engravers and some more in their own houses. It was almost everybody was an engraver or a glass painter. Now is nobody engraving in Harrachov anymore. I was the last apprentice. And on the right side, on the very right side, is that cottage belongs to me. It is the house or the cottage of my ancestors, and so I'm taking care of it. It's maybe the only place where a engraving or cutting workshop in that small house is still, you can still see it. It's like a museum, but it's the only one in the world, I'm sure. There's nothing else like that. So this is Dominic Beeman after a drawing by Hedonius. So you can see the small engraving clays, and he was working with a foot pedal, no electricity, and doing this excellent work. And when I was about 12 years old, my father got the same kind of engraving lathe with a foot pedal, and I started to work. It's now more than 70 years ago. This is my first engraving made on that small. So you see, that was I did it almost my whole apprenticeship. This hunting motifs. But it's well done. I mean, for a boy. and these are plaster castings from engravings Dominic Beeman made. I think the best portrait in portraiture, the best of all times. And it was a time of the Empire called Biedermeier. It was such the first half of the 19th century. I'm sorry. So his sponsors was Count Sternberg, Caspar Sternberg, who lived partly in Prague and partly in Germany, in Regensburg, and he made several portraits of him. So you can see, and Takema says here, and for him, he's the guru. He is doing in his small workshop at the Market Street here in Corning. He's doing engravings which are very close to the engravings of Dominic Beeman. This is my favorite engraving he did. It's an unknown lady. Who knows who it was? It may be many the nobilities from Russia and Germany came to a spa, and the Francis spa in the west part of Bohemia, where he worked. He became also a citizen of Prague and studied at the academy. It was a different name at that time, so, but he got lessons in anatomy and in drawing, and this is what him made so special under the other engravers. He knew about the construction and of the figure. And it's a gorgeous composition, the central composition, typical for this classical time. And I made in his way of composing portraits his picture, but this was carved into plaster and then cast into bronze. So I was going in his tradition, but doing it a little bit different, emphasizing some parts and the unimportant to me, making not so deep. And this is Tom Bichner. I must say that he was the most important to me, inviting me to the States 1983 to give a lecture at the gas conference in Tucson, Arizona. And since then, I'm here every year, so I became what I would say an American living in Prague. You know. So a great man, a great friend, and I'm very thankful to him. And this was an engraving of Smetana I did for the exhibition in Corning, 1979, and it was accepted. It's a part of the collection in the Corning Museum, and you can see that I went more in a way of reducing the figure and doing less to get the image. Even more in that portrait of Tolstoy, when there is no eye at all, only few deep cuts building the whole face. But this is still copper wheel engraving. And later I went more to diamond and to stone, big, to the big glaze. This is also copper wheel engraved. Another great man, I call it the gallery of my friends. It's Marc Chagall. Or Beethoven. Goethe, who said, the limitation makes a master. And he also said, it's not what it is, but how it's made. Not what, but how is important. And this I did in Pilchak, 1985, and the glass in Pilchak was made from bottles, and I liked it, glass, very much. And I did some engravings, and I thought I will finish it later, but when I came home, I said the piece is finished. So this is, this is what I discovered last year. This is wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi means to have things unfinished, incomplete. The perfectionist, the not perfection or no perfection. And this comes from the old Japanese tradition, and it's not possible to tell the whole story about wabi-sabi, but it's called the art of life. Reducing things, get rid of things not important, and so forth. And then I did other friends I liked, like Egon Schiele, the Austrian painter, or Oskar Kokoschka, who lived in Prague, was Austrian. But you see, it's always about composition. It's not only who it is or what it is. It's just how you compose it into a frame or into a shape, and what you really can leave out. This is a part of wabi-sabi, to reduce, just to leave out things. Dina is smiling. And this is maybe the most reduced picture I ever did. I did it in Pittsburgh. I got a bullseye glass. They slammed it together for me, and one plate was red, and on the top was a black one, very hard glass. I could hardly go through it by engraving. But on the other hand, the advantage was I was not allowed, or I couldn't do any details. I had to keep only this few, and it looks like a brush painting, a Japanese brush painting, which I'm very glad that it happened that way. So this is maybe the long way from the Dominic Beeman to a more abstraction, to a more simplicity is the most important in wabi-sabi too. And I did here in Corning some demos to show that you can build up a picture, engraving, using just one wheel. And also I thought I will finish it later, but it's just finished. This is always important, not to try to finish it immediately. Leave it for a while, and then you discover it. You cannot add anything anymore. It's just there. And quite often I'm going back to Franz Kafka, because this image, and this is also important if I'm doing somebody from the past, from the history. So it's to me I'm more free. I'm not so depending on that face. So it's not about the likeness. It's more what they call imaginative portraiture. It's just to express the person in a little bit more abstract way, and to find out that the essence of. So Tom Bichner would say this goat eye, that it's so characteristic for this engraving, that he was writing about this terrible 20th century. In fact, he anticipated this what was coming, the Second War and all these terrible things people are doing. So, and now I go back to again to some influential glass engravings. Jaroslav Horejc was not a glass man, he was working with metal, but Stefan Rath from the Lobmeier factory in Kaminsky-Shenov discovered him and asked him to do designs for engraving. And to me, I think he's the best in the second half of the 20th century. And what's important to me, he went back to discover this, the wheels, not to smooth it out, but to cut it as a wheel is asking for. You can see this. Not everybody likes it, but to me it's inspiring, really. Famous is his dance, the dance called. And then is Jan Kotik. After the war in the 50s, he came up with abstract art into glass. One of his also he's designing it, and some engravers would execute it. And one piece is in the collection in the museum, and this was also exhibited here in the time of that big Czech shows called, how was it called?
Design in an Age of Adversity.
Yes, and it was just 1945 to 1980.
Right.
And so he is a very important and very influential painter who worked also with glass. And this is another piece you can see in the collection upstairs, made by Václav Ziegler, and I think his engravings belong to the best in the middle of the century. It's, I think, 1960. A cameo engraving, and I'm saying to the students, go and look at it and try to do something like that, which happened. A student made a cameo engraving, and the cameo engraving, in fact, is much easier than the intaglio. So it's similar to a woodcut or a linocut. So this is what they can learn also from these examples. This is another engraving done by Václav Ziegler, and this is a print a student made here in, I don't know, several years ago. So we are not only learning from the 19th century, but we are learning also from what happened in the 20s, also recent art, recently done things. Yeah, this is, what's the name? I forgot the name. Do you remember when somebody, here her husband is quite a famous writer. But why I'm showing that, sometimes people bring a photo and say, I would like to engrave that. At first I said, do rather a Zen drawing or keep something, from the what is here in the history. But they just want to do this boy with a lamp from a Caucasus somewhere, but she did it in such a wonderful way that I'm amazed by the result. That the students can. I'm always surprised, I must say. Always the students are much better than I am, I must say. Yeah. Or this is a Zen drawing. It means a Zen drawing, you don't look at the pencil and you are doing it automatically or unconsciously. And this is a good way to make immediately image, and the people can the very first day engrave it and print it, and it works. So we often start, and this is an abstraction. And I remember in 1984 I gave a lecture for the GAS conference, and together with me an engraver from Steuben. Do you remember the name? He died quite young. Takeo. What was it? Oh, yeah, you know him. Sure. Huh? No. Oh, it's not as important. But this engraver from Steuben started to talk about engraving, that you have to learn it 6 years to be able to do an engraving. And I said, if you would like to have an engraving in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you can do it today. So they say, it sounds like a joke, but it isn't. It's just one talks about the craftsmanship, about how, and Takeo could talk about it. That really, to be a really good engraver, you have to do it your whole life to get really good. He's now 60, so how long do you engrave, Takeo? 40 years? 42 years. And my point of view was that it's just about this, what you are thinking about, and the technique is not so difficult. You can spontaneously do something, and Steve Dale Edwards took out of his pocket a drawing of his son, 6-year-old son, and of course he engraved it, and of course it was the best engraving. And it could be easy along with Paul Klee or some other modern artists. And this, I made some small brochures called Intaglio to explain the history of engraving. And this drawing is from a cave carving made in Norway 25,000 years ago. And maybe this is much better, much more contemporary than anything else. It's they didn't draw or carve what they have seen. They carved what they knew, what they about this elk cow. There in the back is a baby, and the baby cow, and you have. It's an X-ray. Of course, it's not a real X-ray. It's just to tell something about that animal, which was much more than an elusive drawing, as usually we can see. And along with that goes another, absolutely, to me, again, the best contemporary engraving. And this is done, people wouldn't believe it, but it's done by a child, a 3-year-old girl, Sophia. She is the daughter of Amy. And in fact, Amy was in my class when I started to teach here, and she became the teacher of Sophia. So This is just a plate. This girl takes a plate and makes something with that wheel. Nobody can, no adult would be able to do the same. And when they asked Sophia what is it, and she would say it's a cow and strawberries. And you have to look close, and you will discover that's really, it is there. You know, this imagination of a child. So these are the real inspirations for us, I think. The 25,000-year-old carving, and also this gorgeous drawings of children. They're always the best. And we adults we lost it, and we are trying to get it back somehow, and learning from the children. There's another examples, and Tom Bichner liked that very much, because this is a carneol, a semi-precious stone, only 1 inch large, only 1 inch. And this carving done in the similar way as we are doing now, and this is from ancient Greek time. It's before Christ, so I don't know how old it is, but it's a rooster, and it's so powerful and so well made and so good, expressing the wheels, that it's amazing. It's the best, also one of the best examples. And we always counted how many strokes did the engraver. And he would even ask the painters he was teaching, do a picture with so few strokes like this engraver did. And there are gorgeous examples of Roman engravings, and also in the museum. And again, we are going to look at it and not engrave, but carve it in the similar way like they did. So this is, and my favorite, one of my favorite pieces is a Roman cup, a very small, tiny cup with a beautiful green color, and the engraving 2,000 years ago with an image of Christ healing the paralytic. You can see it in the exhibition, but it's not, you can't really see it very well. So there is a drawing besides, and you can see it maybe better in the library, some good photos. But anyway, it's what, again, an example where to go with a contemporary engraving. And I made a drawing of it that you can see what's about. And last year, the students made a copy of that bowl to learn more about it, how it's made, and even this year they started to do some details of it. That's all. Thank you.
It's a little bit after 7, so we don't really have time for questions, but I invite you to stay afterwards. Please feel free to leave if you want, but those people who maybe would like to talk to Jiri or April. Oh, Lenka.
Lenka.
Oh, yes, please.
One
We
more
want to hear
song,
Lenka.
please.
Yes, please. Lenka, absolutely. Oh, yes, thank you.
I play song Midnight. Don't
Půlnoc rozevřela svoje černý křídla, smutek vklouzl do ulic. Z tmavých koutů lampy kouzlej siluety dlouhonohých tanečnic. Proč cpou ty stíny furt do hlavy splíny a to teď mít její jde na dom. Půlnoc dělá scény samý, Magdaleny čmára křídou po všech střech.
Really a special evening. Good night, everyone. Thanks.